maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers need a little bit of drama. And they don't need the locker room issues that they had. They don't need what they've had going on for the last 4 or 5 years. They don't need a quarterback who's asking for a trade. None of that. But maybe it's time to have the discussion, and I am open to that discussion for the first time, that maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers needed to weigh a little bit more whether the locker room morale was more important than the on-field productivity. Because right now, the Steelers could use a spark. They could use a star. They could use another playmaker. And they had one. They chose to get rid of all the drama, all the nonsense. And don't get me wrong, I think I and anybody else who can make a story out of it, and yeah, I'll call out all the talking heads, myself included, are the only ones that would benefit from locker room chaos. We're usually the only ones who benefit from locker room chaos. It does the team no good, the fan base no good, and the Super Bowl run no good. It does YouTube numbers well. But that's not the conversation. And even I have denied that the locker room chaos, the hidden or the beat up morale that would have been caused if the Steelers went a different direction this offseason was not warranted and did not help enough to sacrifice what the Steelers gave up. But where we sit here today, I'm open to that conversation and I'm open to the discussion. And I think it's time to talk about if the Pittsburgh Steelers made one giant mistake and what it would have cost them to not make that mistake versus what it's costing them after making it. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackmine. Thank you for jumping on to another episode of Steelers to Go, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/allsteelerstalk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. Before we get going, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. Can't thank you enough. It does wonders for the YouTube channel, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I come to you every morning, Monday through Friday, with a little bit of news, a little bit of analysis. Today, we're talking about a trade that the Pittsburgh Steelers made after the NFL draft that I supported, that I saw coming, that I knew was on the horizon in January. I still remember to this day getting the phone call that said calls were being made. It's going to take more than what you believe, which turned out not to be that true, but we'll get into that in a second. But the Steelers are looking to move on from the one and only George Pickens. They are ready to move in a different direction. And everybody immediately said, that's crazy. Why would they do that? And the answer was very easy, and it remains very easy. The Steelers still feel the same exact way that, yes, George Pickens is incredibly talented. Yes, George Pickens is only 24 years old, and he's got a great career ahead of him. And you are seeing what the Dallas Cowboys got in this guy instantly. But he's also a menace in the locker room and did not have many people supporting the off-the-field issues or the helmet slams or the lashing out or the showing up late to practice or all of the above. He was losing friends fast in Pittsburgh, coaching staff included, and it was time for the Pittsburgh Steelers to move on. And that, if you just put it on paper, can be supported. Easy. But when you look at the grand scheme of things and where the Pittsburgh Steelers have gone since, you sit there and go, what was worth it and what was not? Because if the Steelers looked at this and said, we need to solve the locker room drama, we could have no drama this season, none whatsoever. Okay. What's the sacrifice that you made in that? That you don't have a talented enough offense? That DK Metcalf has nobody to help take any coverage away from him? That Aaron Rodgers is finding himself being sacked and freaking out and starting to lose his mind a little bit in the pocket because, well, as soon as he drops back, it's either DK Metcalf or nothing, and most times it's nothing? Is that the sacrifice that you were willing to make, apparently, when you traded George Pickens? Because if George was here, there would be issues, obviously. You'd look at George Pickens and you'd say, chances are he'd be showing up late to practice, Chances are him and Aaron wouldn't be the bestest of friends. Chances are him and Jalen Ramsey and Joey Porter Jr. probably would get a little bit chippy from time to time throughout the season. And chances are that if the Steelers were 1-3 in the last 4 games and George was not putting up crazy numbers, that there'd be some moments like there've been in Dallas where there's helmets on the ground and things are going nuts and cameras are turned to George Pickens, obviously. But he's also on pace to have his best career season. He's got 764 yards in 9 games and 6 touchdowns. He hasn't scored a touchdown in the last 3 games because CeeDee Lamb's back. But besides that, the guy has been an absolute show for the city of Dallas. And he's loving it. That star on the side of his helmet fits him well. It does. And the Steelers probably feel as if they could have done better to replace him. And if you go back to January, the conversation was they're not going to give him up for nothing. A 3rd-round pick almost feels like nothing. It almost feels as if you look at it right now and say, I get it that the market was not great. It was not very high. And there were issues. And his reputation around the NFL is pretty bad. I get all of that. The pros and cons there are is a 3rd-round pick going to replace George Pickens, because that's the conversation you have anytime you make a trade. Is this trade going to replace this player? Are we getting an even exchange? And I think the Steelers viewed it more as it's not even on the field, but rather it is even in terms of morale. A 3rd-round pick gives us peace of mind to know that George is not going to be an issue this season. I exhale like everybody else does to say, how much better would you have been if you just dealt with the chaos? If you just dealt with the issues? If you dealt with George being in the locker room, being a menace and not having a bunch of friends and people being upset that he's showing up late to practice? Could you just deal with it for 1 season? Is that a possibility? Was it a possibility? And how much better would you be? You'd have to think that the Steelers' offense would be significantly better in the passing game, that DK Metcalf would be open much more of the time, and that you'd have names like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson actually playing their correct position, which is a wide receiver 3. Being able to be gadget guys who are open and who could do fancy, fun, electrifying things without having the pressure of being the guy that is the go-to if DK is double teamed, which is most of the time. Feels like it opens up a lot. Feels like if George is here, a lot of things change. And maybe this team doesn't lose 3 of their last 4. Now, on the other side of that, he doesn't fix the defense at all. And the defense is, I get it, they've had 2 or 3 good games, but they are not very good. And they haven't played very well. And that wouldn't change with George Pickens. But the offense probably would. You'd probably have more success with Aaron Rodgers. You'd probably find yourself winning a couple more games. You maybe win a shootout against Cincinnati in Cincinnati. You maybe win, probably not against Seattle. They looked good. Probably not against LA. That was just Aaron. That was atrocious. But I think you'd at least grab another win, maybe 2 in the 5-4 season that you've collected. And then it's just a matter of how can you stop the ship from sinking so much that George doesn't lose his mind, that the issues don't explode, because that's when it started. It was never week 1. George Pickens is out here. Oh my gosh, I hate this team. I'm throwing my helmet. I'm liking posts about Kenny Pickett. No, it was week 10. It was week 11. It was right around this time where George would do things like comments that he doesn't have a quarterback when Kenny's his quarterback and then deny it, where he'd delete all of his pictures about the Pittsburgh Steelers and then say, I've never had any pictures about the Pittsburgh Steelers ever. George is, again, that's just George Pickens, man. And that is a very short list of a billion things that he seemed to have done in 3 years in Pittsburgh, and then a little bit after he left. But I think that conversation would have been there. Would I have personally done it? I don't know, but my opinion doesn't matter. I would have went out there and said a second round pick is probably where I'm budging at. A third round pick doesn't make much sense to me. I would have had to sit down and talk to Aaron Rodgers and say, can you handle this guy? And can you deal with the nonsense that is coming? I personally think George is a cancer to most locker rooms, and I will be very open to that conversation. But I also think that the Steelers' offense is not even close to enough. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, if you're trying to win a Super Bowl, most other things don't matter. Ask Antonio Brown. Ask the Steelers when they had the killer bees, and two of those bees were causing more issues than anybody else in the NFL. But they were winning football games. And I think that's a sacrifice sometimes you got to make. Nothing they can do about it now. But I think where we sit here today, in the most boring week of the season, there's a good conversation about how much drama the Steelers should have been able to take on, or would have been willing to take on, to potentially win more football games and keep themselves competitive. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of Steelers to Go, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/allsteelerstalkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. Before you head out of here, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. Can't thank you enough. And with that said, I'll be back later for the flagship show. Until then, enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.